Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? I hope. So my name is Silvia Ivarelli. I'm a senior project advisor in CINEA in the Life, Climate and Energy Unit. And I will be moderating this session that is dedicated, as you know, to energy poverty and energy communities, to very relevant topics to support really the citizen empowerment in the clean energy transition and to support the delivery of the European Green Deal. And so the ENERPOV topic that is alleviating household energy poverty in Europe, and the ENERCOM one, developing support mechanism for energy communities. This is, you can see on the screen, the agenda. We will start with the two presentations on the policy background from two colleagues, first on energy communities with two colleagues from ENER, Achille Lanoset from DG Energy B1, the unit on dealing with consumer local initiatives and just transition. And then Vera Chrysler from DG Energy Unit C1, Renewables and Energy System Integration Policies. Then we will move to the policy background related to energy poverty. And this presentation will be given by Elena Donari from NRB1, Still Consumer Local Initiative and Just Transition. Then my colleague Nina Klemola will introduce you to the first topic of the session on energy poverty, followed by Talia Brun, who will then present you the topic on energy communities. We will leave all the questions for the end, so there will be no interruption between all the presentation. So we will have a Q&A session of 10-15 minutes toward the end. And the way we will dealing with your question is through Slido. So you will need to connect to slido.com, and then with the event code that you can see on the slide, or also there is also the QR code that could be as well used. And then you have to select this room, so the room corresponding to session 7, to ensure that we get all your questions. And then since we would hope or expect to receive quite a number of questions, you are invited to somehow look before putting forward the question, to look if there are already questions that somehow correspond to what you would like to ask, and then just vote that question, so that we will also, at the end, there will be kind of a ranking of questions, and we will start with the questions that have been most voted. I hope that's clear. And so without further ado, we just start. So Achille and Vera, the floor is yours, please.
Yes,
Achille?
thank you very
Yes.
much. Yes. Let me see. Sorry for the small delay. My camera should come on. Yes, perfect. So I don't immediately see my dear colleague Vera, so I will go ahead and start presenting. And as she phases in, she can also take over to present part of the presentation. Next slide, please. So just a background and model first. Next slide. So the energy system of the future should be. The image enlarged a little bit, but just to give you the general backdrop, why we are also pushing for energy communities and why we support them, and how that links to a wider strategy as well by the European Commission and European Union. So more liberalized and competitive market energy communities bring new services to the market, more digitalized, smart meters and data interoperability as key enablers, consumer-centered, the system that serves the consumer instead of the other way around, integrated, of course, combining heat and power generation to increase autonomy and decarbonize. Next slide, please. So here a bit of a rudimentary sketch of the business models that would exist for the communities, just to recall. So we see here two cases. They invest in energy efficiency measures which can be basic services to their members to reduce consumption, but it can also be investment in energy efficient technology, such as district heating systems or heat pumps. And in this regard, you will be informed by Italia that for Enercom we are also looking at these less developed areas for energy communities to do a little bit more research there on how they can emerge. They can also, of course, invest in more traditional production capacity like solar or wind. And then what they do next with that electricity they generate is quite different. They can sell it on the market, they can market their flexibility, or they can self-supply or share energy. So these are a bit of the main things that we see currently. Next slide. The clean energy package, next slide, quick recap. So models of consumer empowerment, individual active customers, jointly acting active customers at a multi-apartment scale, and then energy communities organized through a legal entity as a social economy or social enterprise, if you will. Next slide. So the purpose of the energy communities, according to the clean energy package, was public acceptance, private capital investment, and potentially also delivering flexibility. This latter purpose is still quite untapped and underdeveloped and requires further research on how we can enable this. Next slide, please. The differences. So very broadly speaking, it's important to keep in mind, because we ask as well in the call to take into account these differences in participation and governance structures so that we can leverage the advantages of both of these entities with regard to those differences as well. And you see them here summarized. And I thought also, given that we do energy poverty and energy communities in tandem, would be nice to highlight that the RED II also prescribes this participation that is accessible for low-income households. Otherwise, what you need to keep in mind is the citizen energy communities. Anyone can participate, really, any entity, but it's locked down, or the control is locked down to small actors, small enterprises, local authorities, and households. And for the renewable energy communities, it is limited to those SMEs, local authorities, and households, and then the effective control needs to sit with those in proximity of the renewable energy project. So it's a more localized form of energy communities. Next slide, please. Enabling frameworks. So here we have them. So in general, for both concepts, we facilitate market integration. So they have the right to engage in certain activities, and to have easy or more easy procedures to also get the necessary permits and licensing in order to exercise these activities and enter the market. And in addition, there's some privileges for the renewable energy communities, because you saw they're a bit more locked down, more focused also on having households and lower income consumers participate to the entity. So they are also in this regard a little bit more deserving of additional support. And here you see an outline. So capacity building support for public authorities as a support structure for energy communities is part of the equation and quite important. And we continue to ask for research in this regard. And of course, also the possibility to access support schemes. And here the state aid guidelines also correlate with this enabling framework that allows for these potential exemption from bidding procedure or eased participation requirements. Especially the latter, I think, still deserves a little bit more research, these eased participation requirements. What could I mean? Next slide, please. Repower EU. The EU in crisis modus not so long ago. Energy prices were spiraling out of control, you might say, or very high. We all know it. We all saw it on our energy bills. So we also launched the Repower EU strategy to tackle this issue coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic as well. And here, interestingly, the energy communities, they get an additional role, an additional purpose, if you will. And this is the access to affordable energy through self-consumption schemes, and which we have defined then as energy sharing now. But so stable prices or affordable prices is something that energy communities have proven during the crisis, that with their own production capacity and balancing this careful with their consumption can deliver on. But of course, now that everything has normalized, the market prices have normalized, it's not necessarily still the most affordable offer on the market that you get from your energy community supplier. Next slide, please. Key Repower EU policy instruments. So just an outline here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but it's just to give you an idea of what type of policy documents came out of this Repower EU strategy, and then that subsequently informed the next legislative interventions under the Fit for 55 package as well. What's most interesting is under the EU solar strategy, EU solar energy strategy, sorry. We put a political target, a shared political target between the member states and the European Union to aspire to have one energy community in every municipality with a population higher than 10,000 by 2025. So the clock is ticking, and your research will definitely help deliver on or get closer to this target. Let's say. Next slide, please. The Fit for 55 package, as I said, next slide, the Repower EU also informed partially this package. And then we see the different instruments. So we see the Renewable Energy Directive, potential role recognition for energy communities in offshore wind, public procurement, heat production. Again, you will see in the Enercom call that we asked to also explore this district heating and cooling systems that energy communities together with municipalities can build, invest, or manage. A general framework for fast-tracking permitting procedures, but this is for small-scale RES installations, which can be relevant to energy communities, of course. In the Energy Efficiency Directive, we recognize the potential role in tackling energy poverty. And there's also the requirement to assess the role and impact in local heating plans of energy communities. And the EPBD calls for zero-emission buildings, and there's also a gradual phase-in of solar PV in new and existing buildings. And these zero-emission buildings, part of that is that they have a low greenhouse gas emission status, and how to contribute that is having your solar PV on your roof, but also by sharing energy within a renewable energy community or within a local proximity. That can also count towards the zero emission building. And then the Social Climate Fund regulation, I'm sure Elena will say a little bit more about that, but energy communities there also can be part of the plan to target vulnerable households and micro enterprises and transport users. Next slide, please. Other key policy documents for your info. So there is the RRPs in the context of Repower EU. There's a Repower EU chapter in the recovery and resilience plans, and there the Commission provided guidance and said to the member state, well, you can think about leveraging this or promoting these energy communities, because we see they're doing well in the energy crisis where they have enough production capacity. Commission guidance on the update of the national energy and climate plans, which is also currently ongoing. And here, again, we say, okay, energy communities can be a vehicle to empower consumers, and then with a special focus again on the vulnerable groups. And then the Commission recommendation to tackle energy poverty, of course, where we also have a reference to this collective self-consumption or energy sharing, because we believe that is the gist of it. That is what helps deliver on stable prices, is this direct connection between renewable energy and the consumer, even if that installation is off-site. So you can act as if you're self-consuming on your own roof, but actually it's a solar PV park in the wider area, for example. Next slide, please. The electricity market design reform, so the Commission proposal, and now we have a political agreement. So soon I will be able to say much more on this. But okay, community energy sharing is one of the models that we push forward. Communities could already share, but it was not really clear how sharing was defined and how to implement it. So we put a general framework in place. We proposed it, at least, with rights and responsibilities. for the relevant actors, and this data management infrastructure in the backend that says, okay, you need to correlate the metering data and deduct it automatically. So it's not a hassle for the consumer to engage in self-consumption of offsite generation. Next slide, please. So just a new scenario for your info. Next slide, please. All right, EU support for energy communities. Next slide. So this is a bit of an overview of the assistance that we have. It's spread out between ENER, but also Regio is increasingly taking up some roles with regard to energy communities. So it is Communities for Climate Initiative, which is much broader than energy alone, also focusing on other essential resources. We have this handbook on cross-border energy communities that is being developed, so exploring that potential. And the energy community initiatives by ENER and CINEA. And I think there, most importantly, we have this citizen-led renovation and then the energy communities facility, on which Talia will undoubtedly say a few words, I think, as well. I hope. Next slide, please. And voila, let's keep in touch. The Twitter bird should be an X by now, unfortunately. I like the bird better. But nevertheless, the link is the same. So find us there or anywhere else and keep following the Commission. And that was it from our side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Achille, for this comprehensive overview of the policy background and also of the different initiatives supporting energy communities. And then I would like to give the floor to Elena Donari to tell us about the policy framework related to energy poverty. Elena, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone also from me. I think I will go more through highlights, as there have been several developments, especially in the recent year in this area. So for reasons of time constraints, I'll try to give you, the best glimpse I can make, and then perhaps if there are questions, I'm also available to answer. So next slide, please. So we start a bit with having a sense of the size of the problem, and we use one of the indicators. It is available at EU level from ESTAT, which is the share of population unable to keep their homes adequately warm. And from the list, this comprehensive data that we have based on this indicator, the size of this problem concerns 40 million of EU citizens, which is accounts from 9.3% of our population. So it's a serious concern across the EU member states. And the trend is actually towards an increase in energy poverty. We are waiting for the latest data that will be published by ESTAT in June to have a more comprehensive view of last year, 2023. But of course, the effects of the energy crisis are already telling us that we should expect an increase, especially affecting the low and the lowest income households. Here you see also a table where we indicate that the most significant increases were recorded in Spain and the Czech Republic by 21% and even over 100% respectively. So considering the situation we are coming from, I think this information shouldn't surprise us. Next slide, please. I think before starting with the policy and the legislative developments we're going to, I think it's important to recall what we mean by energy poverty, and especially now that it has been agreed at the EU level to have an energy poverty definition, which is currently in the recast energy efficiency directive that's been adopted. And you see it in its long definition encompassing several aspects, but for us it's important to recall that we are referring to And we are trying to somehow encompass with this definition the multi-dimension of the problem. And in particular, usually we refer to a combination of issues relating to low income and the expenditure on energy, and also the efficiency of homes. And this definition is actually the first step to have a common understanding and recognition of the problem, and of course can be further developed and translated into the national context, even in more sophisticated terms, to capture all the aspects, including some also mentioned there, the links with the health issues, for instance, the link to the essential services is also included there. And we hope that this will help actually design better responses. Just for you to know, our member states have 2 years from October 2023 to transpose this definition into their national legislation. Next slide, please. So here I wanted to recall actually that we are coming a long way, and there have been already well-established responsibility for member states to address energy poverty and also to report on progress in this respect. And the energy poverty concept that was appeared as early as the 2009, the third energy package, and in particular in the electricity and gas directives, and in that respect, there was a call on the member states to develop national action plans or other appropriate frameworks to tackle energy poverty. And then there's been also other, let's say, call on addressing that through structural measures through energy policy, because this is the, let's say, the framework we are operating in, but complementary in addition to social policy and any other relevant policies that could help. And in the Electricity Directive of 2019, and in line with the regulation on the governance of the Energy Union and climate action, member states have the responsibility to diagnose the number of energy poor in their territory, identify whether the number is significant, and must establish and publish these criteria underpinning the assessment. And also there is a reference to a significant number of people in energy poverty. If the member states in this legislation comes to the conclusion that the number is significant, should also indicate the policies and measures to address the problem, and through the national energy and climate plans also indicate a national objective, time-bound, to reduce energy poverty. Next slide, please. I also want to spend a couple of seconds on the national energy and climate plans, because this is a very key moment in the dialogue which has been established in this respect between the Commission and the member states, given that we are waiting for the final submission of these plans by June this year. And already last year, a year before, again in June, the member states were to submit their draft updated NECPs in line with some obligations under the governance regulation. And the Commission, in that respect, has published also guidance to help member states on this process. And this is relevant also in the area of energy poverty, which is one of the area that also is going to be updated, because we have trials to explain how all those concepts that I mentioned before, the significant number of energy poor, what indicators could have been used to detect the problem, and also what type of measures and that could be taken to address it. We have already tried to provide some guidance for that process through a recommendation document that was published in 2020, which is And that's and also with a specific guidance for the updates on the in view of this exercise on the NECPs, because the member states during this update should have been taken into account the latest legislative developments we are going to see in a second, and especially what I just mentioned, the energy poverty definition, whether there was no definition in the member state, and also what was at the time the proposal of establishing a social climate fund that could also help addressing the problem. Last year in December, the Commission has published also the EU-wide assessment of these draft updated NECPs, and together with also assessments of country-specific recommendations for the 21 member states at the time that have submitted their draft plans. And I must say that unfortunately, most of the member states are still lacking a clear definition of energy poverty, or should carry out a proper assessment of the number of households in energy poverty, set a target when needed to reduce this number. And also, we have seen that, and this is all public in the document has been published, there's still lack of structural policies and measures to alleviate the problem, and in particular through policy initiatives like energy efficiency improvements, the decarbonization measures that could support the vulnerable groups, and also access to finance, including the relevant synergies with the Social Climate Fund. So we hope that with the final version of the national energy climate plans, these concerns will be duly addressed. Next slide, please. So here I would like to refer, as I said, I'll give you some highlights from the relevant legislative proposals that have been adopted and later, I would say, provisionally agreed, but almost at the end of the cycle of approval. So here I refer to the recast Energy Efficiency Directive, and in particular to the article which create the links between the energy savings obligations and also the prioritization of actions towards here it's a long series of, let's say, categories. So we refer to people affected by energy poverty, vulnerable customers, people in low-income households, and also people living in social housing. Perhaps I would like to clarify that sometimes you see you have a different, let's say, categories of people, but these are explained for the purposes of actually the objectives of the legal act and the measures also that are included in the legal act. So that's the reason for listing, more comprehensive group of population. And here also there is a link on what I referred just a second ago on the NECPs, because if the member states has not notified the share of households in energy poverty under the NECP, then we provide some, let's say, indicators that would help the member states to have somehow calculation in that respect under this article. So here, I mean, what is important to remember is actually that prioritization in terms of energy savings and the recognition of this type of categories. And the link to the NECP exercise I referred before. Next slide, please. So here is another important article, again, under the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is very comprehensive and particularly dedicated to vulnerable groups and people in energy poverty. It's a completely new article which introduced several specific requirements for member states to take actions from the energy efficiency perspective. which in our view, but also in the view of the co-legislator, they have agreed on this text. It's a very effective way to address the root causes of this problem. And so there are some general obligation the member states to take appropriate measures to empower and protect people, the categories I mentioned before, including energy poor. And also the member states are required to identify and define the people in need to take these actions in a target way. And also they're also required to, here you see indicated also the final users in recognition also of those who don't have perhaps a direct or individual contract with the energy suppliers, so to be very inclusive of those who are falling under those category. And in addition, to the prioritization and inclusiveness expressed in this article, I think it's also important to recall the fact that these articles also address the fact that these measures should also take into account the distributional effects from other policies and provide some required mitigation measures. This creates also somehow the link with the two elements that you also see indicated on the slide. The fact that there is the possibility also now to make use of the social economic fund. We'll refer in a second to that specifically with the slide. Because the social economic fund is actually a fund which is dedicated to specifically those vulnerable households and micro enterprises that will be impacted by the extensions of the ETS to buildings and transport, and offers type of resources, especially to address it in a structural way and to mitigate such impact. In the previous article is also there was also reference to a practice which is already used by several member states. So the fact to use for distributional purposes the revenues from the existing already EU ETS for investments also into energy efficiency improvements, for instance. Just a short reference again to the previous article, which could be of interest of the audience connected online. It also referred to the establishment of a network of experts or entrusting existing ones, because it's also recognition that experts from various sectors, not only the energy efficiency or the buildings renovation sector, but also the health sector, social sectors, they can support in particular the local, but also the national decision makers in implementing energy efficiency improvement measures that could alleviate energy poverty and also contribute to a more robust long-term solutions to mitigate this problem. Here, so the social economic fund, just to remember that we are talking about 86.7 billion euros that will be available to all EU member states from 2026 until 2032 for the time being. Say the means to have access to this type of resources is actually the submission of what we call a national socio-economic plan by the member state to the Commission. The process of preparation for those plans is undergoing. The Commission is available to provide several types of guidance, official documents, but also accompanying the member states in the drafting. And I think it will be also important that the member states are including all relevant actors, especially those who are already active in this area through the different sectors to contribute to the inputs that will be included in the plans. And the plans will include specifically measures and investments in the area of energy and transport, and in particular, many of the measures I mentioned before as structural, so energy efficiency improvements, building renovations, decarbonization of heating and cooling, even community-led projects as the energy communities, renewable energy communities we just heard about. And so we hope that this could be an interesting instrument. Next
Sorry,
slide.
Elena, 2
Yeah.
minutes more, not
Sure.
more.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry.
So Article 22, I think this is, I would just mention that it has a good link to what is in the call. So the creation of one-stop shops or similar mechanism to provide, technical, administrative, financial advice. Again, it's an article in the Energy Efficiency Directive, but it can be even further developed. And here it's important to recall that there is also, again, the focus on energy poverty. It's linked to the fact that one-stop shop, they should offer also dedicated services for people affected by energy poverty in recognition of the specific barriers, cultural, administrative, financial barriers of these categories of people. And next slide. Here is just a roundup of other type of measures that have been recently approved and endorsed in what has been the Fit for 55 package that has been presented under the European Green Deal. And here just to show you the coherence of the legal framework in the approach towards energy poverty. We already spoken about the Energy Efficiency Directive. I would just wanted to mention that also through the other, let's say, initiatives like for instance, the reform of the market design, and also the recently and also the gas package revision. We have tried especially to reinforce protection for the vulnerable consumers and the energy poor, including in terms of protecting them better from situations where they are unable to pay for the bills. So enhanced protections against disconnections, but also reinforcing their rights, transparency, and the particular attention we give to these categories. And on the other hand, trying to make sure that they have also access to the opportunities coming from the energy transition, so also in terms of empowering them. And I have a particular attention, especially on accessing finance, and also what type of cost they are confronted with, that they are preventing, or barriers they're preventing them also to participate actively into the energy transition. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Just go towards the end. I would just mention that everything I have said today and everything I couldn't say for reasons of time, you will find it in the recommendation that we have published on energy poverty last October, including a staff working document where you find a lot of examples and good practices across member states, and also clear reference to the legislative framework that we have in place. And here is the link to that. And last slide, please. I would like to mention in particular project that we support as DG Energy, which is the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub. So it's more about the technical assistance that we offer at the local level, in particular working with local authorities, municipalities, and every local actor. Here, I think it's also interesting for you to have access to a lot of resources online, including trainings. And we have also publications in the area of energy poverty, introductory guides, publications in relation to indicators. We have even two, one more comprehensive, one more basic. And recently, we have also a guide to energy poverty diagnosis, and also a guide to planning energy poverty mitigation actions. All this, it's available publicly on the website of this hub, and we also try to keep track of the trends through a map with indicators that you can also access online. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena, and sorry for having cut the presentation. Really very much happening on the energy poverty side. So we clearly understand why somehow maybe you would have needed a bit more time. But in any case, the slides will be available for all participants, so, and also for the one who didn't manage to participate. So this comprehensive background will be available to everybody. I now give the floor to Nina to dive into the topic. The first topic, a presentation on alleviating households' energy poverty in Europe. Thank you very much, Nina.
Thank you very much, Silvia, and good afternoon, everyone. So I will indeed dive straight into the topic. So if we go to the first slide, please. As mentioned just now in Elena's presentation, around 40 million of the EU population were unable to keep their homes adequately warm in the year 2022, which really signals energy poverty as a continuing problem in Europe that may even be on the rise based on what we just heard. So whilst the main causes of energy poverty involve the poor energy performance of buildings and appliances, the low incomes, also combined with high energy expenditure, in particular in the recent years, it does remain a multidimensional issue, as was already mentioned, and involving very different sectors as well. So with this in mind, the overall aim of this topic is to improve the living conditions and lower energy expenditure for the energy poor households through different energy efficiency measures and the increased use of renewable energy. As we have just heard, mitigating energy poverty has been given really increased importance as part of a just energy transition, and different key pieces of EU energy legislation have been updated as part of the Fit for 55 package, including for the particular purposes of this topic, the Energy Efficiency Directive. So as mentioned, this text also sets out to implement energy efficiency measures as a priority among energy poor households and provides a formal EU definition on energy poverty, which is very important for this topic as well. I should also refer again to the second Commission recommendation on energy poverty and the related staff working document, which I really encourage you to have a look at if you're thinking of preparing a proposal under this topic. And finally, what I want to mention here on this slide is the topic budget, which is available to the tune of 6 million euros this year. Next slide, please. So diving into the scope, so this topic consists of 4 different subscopes. The proposals are free to address maximum 2 of these this year. So please pay attention to this restriction. Addressing 2 bullet points will not necessarily mean that the proposal would be evaluated as more relevant or scoring higher. So think about what is feasible for you and what makes sense. The topic is similar, but not exactly the same as in the last year in 2023. So even if you were familiar with that topic, please read carefully this year's topic, because there are changes in the text. Next slide, please. So for the first subscope, so the EED recast acknowledges the need to address a split incentive dilemma and remove barriers to energy efficiency measures in multi-owner properties. And undertaking renovation works in these big types of multifamily buildings requires coordinated action. It requires a lot of cooperation among the apartment owners, but also the tenants, where the case may be. So in this subscope, the aim is really therefore to support the renovation of these types of private multi-apartment buildings with energy poor residents by looking at reinforcing and adapting the governance and decision-making structures of the building management, but also of the homeowners or tenants associations where relevant. We would also expect these proposals to tackle the related regulatory framework barriers. This could be rental laws, property laws, or other regulatory barriers, to look at the split incentives, of course, where these are relevant, and also to set up and coordinate the relevant support services for the households or related to the renovation process itself. The renovation actions supported in these projects should also take into account and consider the ability of residents to remain in their homes after the renovation works and avoid any displacement, in particular, obviously, in case of rental properties. Next slide, please. So then the second subscope focuses on supporting national authorities. As presented earlier, several EED provisions address energy poverty, including Articles 8, 10 on the energy savings obligation and alternative policy measures, Article 22 on information awareness raising, or the comprehensive Article 24 focusing specifically on empowering and protecting vulnerable groups. So with this being said, actions under this subscope should support national authorities in the implementation of these obligations and help bring these different provisions together with a view to ensuring effective and coherent application of the different measures at the national level. So this means actions should help authorities analyze their national policy mix, really consider the national energy poverty context, the needs currently and in the future, and help assess the impact of the different implementation options that are available to them, thereby then helping to choose the most cost-effective and most appropriate implementation routes available. Next slide, please. So this third subscope is then also aimed at the public authorities, but also social intermediaries rather than the households themselves. The aim here is to deliver capacity building for the national, regional, and/or local authorities, as well as the societal intermediaries, and support all of these actors in setting up cross-sectoral coordination structures to address energy poverty. So in other words, the subscope looks specifically to overcome the issue of the often more fragmented responses to energy poverty by individual sectors, or even sometimes across different departments, by offering capacity building to all the relevant sectors and actors and facilitate the setup of longer term or even permanent coordination and cooperation structures to look at and alleviate energy poverty. So the type of structure is left to the applicants, but this could also take the form of national energy poverty observatories if relevant. The activities under this scope should ultimately lead to the actors co-designing and rolling out different interventions and support schemes for energy poor households, but it's not expected that these interventions or schemes are actually part of the proposed action. They're simply one of the longer term outcomes that we're looking for. And finally, to mention that the actors involved, of course, are expected to represent all the relevant sectors, be it social, health, energy, housing sector, to really ensure a fully participatory approach to this issue in the longer term. Next slide, please. So obligated parties under energy efficiency obligation schemes of the EED have potentially at their disposal the necessary data and means to identify energy poverty among their customers. So as referred to in the policy presentation we just heard, the recast EED mentions that energy poor households should be prioritized in the implementation of energy savings obligations under Article 8. So the aim here under this subtopic is really to support obligated parties, so energy companies such as retail energy suppliers or utilities, under the energy efficiency obligation schemes of the EED, and set up and test schemes for energy efficiency improvement measures for the benefit of people affected by energy poverty. But as mentioned just now by Elena, it could also be vulnerable customers, people in low-income households, or people living in social housing. And also, I should mention here that these actions could include, where applicable and relevant, working together with local authorities or municipalities or relevant networks of such actors. And finally, it is expected, and very importantly, it's expected that the obligated parties in particular would either directly be involved in the consortium, or their support is clearly demonstrated in the proposal through letters of support, for instance. So if you are submitting or thinking about submitting a proposal under this subscope, we really invite you to have a close look at the recast Energy Efficiency Directive text and to familiarize yourself with the specificities of those provisions. Next slide, please. So then final points on the scope. So regardless of the particular subscope that you are addressing, all the actions should build on the existing initiatives, including in particular the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub as just presented by Elena, but also Covenant of Mayors, and look at the resources and indicators of that have already been developed so as not to reinvent this wheel. Where relevant, the proposed action should also take into account multiple benefits from the energy efficiency and renewable energy measures for the target groups. This could be improved health or comfort, indoor air quality. The choice of which ones to take into account, of course, depends very much on the activities that you are putting forward. A third point to mention for all the projects is to involve public authorities and intermediaries. These could be consumer organizations, healthcare providers, tenant associations, or indeed energy communities as well as relevant. And a fourth point is that given the number of existing energy-related applications, data platforms, any development of such new IT tools, new applications, platforms, databases should be very clearly justified in the proposal to really indicate the added value compared to what is already in existence. I should then mention as well that regardless of the specific scope you are looking at, the actions may also focus on put particular attention to specific groups, specific segments of energy poor households, but could also take into consideration gender issues where these are relevant. And finally, of course, you can take into account pre-bound and rebound effects where you consider these to be relevant in the context of what you are putting forward. Next slide, please. So then, because we have 4 quite different subscopes in this topic this year, also the topic-specific impacts are varied. You're therefore not expected to address all the listed impacts, but to look at the ones that are really relevant for your activities. All the proposals should present the concrete results which will be delivered and demonstrate how these will contribute to the impacts and really show the clear causality links between the activities and the impacts that you are putting forward. In this topic, you should demonstrate, of course, the specific impacts for the energy poor households rather than consumers in a broader sense. And we would expect the 2 impacts related to energy poor households and consumers to be specifically relevant for most of the actions. So the number of energy poor households with reduced energy costs, of course, refers particularly to those that are directly involved in the measures, specifically, for instance, the renovation of multi-apartment buildings or new energy efficiency schemes by a utility, whereas the number of energy poor households benefiting from measures could, of course, also be more indirectly impacting households from the actions that are looking at, for instance, capacity building support in a specific region. And next slide, please. So then moving on very briefly to the common indicators across all topics that should be addressed in the proposal. We know that specifically demonstrating primary energy savings in this target group can be difficult. Many low-income households already consume less energy than an average household, and it's understandable that in this topic, energy savings may remain on the lower end or even slightly increase in the case of some households to achieve better comfort, depending on the action that is implemented. So the focus here in terms of the energy savings is not so much on the absolute energy savings, but the increased energy efficiency that can be gained from the measures to achieve a minimum comfort level. The rest of the common indicators are hopefully known to you from the other topics as well. Next slide, please. So just a very few key reminders. Please be clear and explicit in your proposal that you are really addressing energy poor households, not consumers overall, as I mentioned, including thinking about how you're identifying them and how you will target them and take into account their specific needs through the activities that you're putting forward. And secondly, to ensure the involvement of all the relevant actors. So think about who are the actors you need to be directly involved to successfully deliver the results and whether their support is adequately demonstrated in the proposals. And a final point here that I'd like to underline is that all the bullet points in this topic have equal value. So if you are thinking of submitting a proposal addressing 2 of those, do consider carefully the feasibility of the planned action, and to ensure that you get quality results that are also focused overall as an action and as a project. And final slide then, please. I want to mention just here a few of the examples of Horizon 2020 and LIFE clean energy transition projects that have from the past and that are ongoing that could be of particular relevance to this year's topic. So ComAct and ComActivate, looking at accelerating retrofits in multifamily apartment buildings. CES and Bender also looking at how vulnerable homeowners and renters in multi-apartment buildings. NPOR looking at the adaptation and implementation of energy efficiency policies in the private rented sector. Social Watt bringing together utilities as obligated parties under the then Article 7, now 8 article of EED to look at the energy efficiency obligation schemes. And finally, NSMOV, which was not an energy poverty project, but a policy support one, which looked at supporting public authorities and key stakeholders to monitor and improve and complement the design and implementation of national EE policies. So these are just examples. There are many further examples through the link here on the slide on the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub page. And I would really recommend that you have a look at those as well when and if you're thinking about submitting a proposal. So I think I will close with that. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to receiving interesting proposals in September.
Thank you very much, Nina, for the presentation. And now we move to the other topic, the ENERCOM topic, developing support mechanism for energy communities. Talia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the last presentation of this session, I will try to be brief. I'm going to be presenting the ENERCOM topic. This topic this year has a budget of 7 million euros. And maybe for some of you that have already looked through the topic text, it will sound familiar to you. A very similar topic was open in 2021 and 2022, but we've decided to reopen it with a slightly different focus. So pay attention to the differences, particularly if you are planning to resubmit a proposal. Now, the deadline is the 19th of September, and I want you to keep that in mind while I am speaking. It's going to be a kind of a demanding topic, but you have the time to really produce an excellent proposal. So hopefully I will be able to give you a few tips to try to respond to the call in the best way possible. Next slide, please. So typically, when we start presenting this topic, we explain the potential benefits of energy communities and why the EU legislation decided to introduce the concept of energy communities in several directives. But I think that Achille presented this very well earlier today. So I will just explain to you why we have decided to reopen this topic. So basically, we see that since 2021, when the topic was first opened, there's been a lot going on. So a lot of new member states try to promote energy communities. There's now an increasing number of places in which energy communities find support services. We also see a growing number of examples of successful energy community projects. However, this is quite unevenly distributed in the continent, so there are still many areas in which energy communities struggle to put projects together. And also we see that even in those places in which energy communities are starting to be to proliferate or to kind of to grow, the number of activities that they do is still rather limited. So many energy communities today focus really on small and medium-sized rest generation, and other technologies, other areas are less covered. So for instance, we have less communities in the heating sector or in the renovation sector, and we want to see more of those examples. And that's kind of the logic to reopen this topic again. Next slide. So this is, for those of you familiar with the old topic, this has stayed the same. So the main objective of this topic is really to foster the collaboration between local and regional authorities and also and energy communities. And this basically focus came from our experience in projects where we saw that energy community projects were much more likely to be successful over time if the local authorities and the regional authorities were supporting them, were backing them. This support can take different forms, and so this topic is open to two types of actions. The first one is basically directly setting up energy communities that are either led by or supported by the relevant public authorities. And the second one is an action in which you focus on delivering services for energy communities. You don't need to tick both. It's not a tick the box exercise. You should really try to focus on one of the two. Next slide. Now, when you define your approach, there are a few things that you need to consider. So very common error that we saw in proposals that were submitted in this topic in the past is that they had a very generic barrier analysis. And so it was hard to justify the approach or the methodology based on that analysis. Now you have time, as I said, it's until September. So the deadline is the 19th of September. So you have the time to now start doing the research and try to understand context-specific barriers before you define the concept and the methodology. So start from the very specificities of the territories that you are going to be working in and justify the approach in line with what you find. The activities that you can focus on are any area of sustainable energy. So it can be production of energy, but it can also be distribution. It can be demand response, mobility, whatever you want. But we will, as I said, we will give priority to proposals that work on areas in which community energy is less developed. So typically we want to receive some proposals on heating and cooling. We want to receive some proposals on renovation, on renewable gases, on those kind of areas, or of other technologies in a context in which they don't exist. So really focus on the gaps and do not propose things that are already a commonplace in the territory that you want to work in. Next slide. The call text lists a number of possible actions. It's not an exhaustive menu. It's not compulsory to cover all of them. It's not compulsory to cover any of them. But most likely, some of you will be either doing some technical support, so helping energy communities define a good business model, helping them with the legal access, with the legal aspects, helping them accessing financing instruments. Most of you will also probably be working on understanding and also defining a kind of a supportive local policy framework, and that can be done in many, many ways. For instance, community participation or investment quotas are a way, working on energy community friendly public procurement or those kind of things. Another set of actions that you could support, depending on, as I said, on the barrier analysis that you do in your territory, would have to do with training. So if you find that there is a training gap in local contractors or a training gap in public officials, you could also devote some of your resources to train specific groups of actors. And most of you will work as well on engaging citizens. And that's an area in which we know from experience that projects tend to underestimate the effort necessary to engage citizens in the communities that result from the project. So please do not underestimate the effort that the legwork and all the effort that is required to really communicate about your initiative and engage your neighbors. And then there is a new type of measures that we would like to see, at least in some of the proposals. One of them is basically the development of structures that are able to pool resources from energy communities to develop, to support the project development and operation. So I think that some of you may be familiar with these kind of structures. They are starting to emerge. They have different names in different parts of Europe, depending on who you talk to. Some people call them second-level communities. Some people call them coalitions or umbrella communities. The idea is always the same. It's really to pool the resources of communities to have some basically common services. And another type of project that we would like to see in some proposals, of course, none of this is compulsory, it's just a menu of options. would be energy communities where they have specific support measures for specific target groups, like the energy poor households or vulnerable customers. Next slide. And then I would like to also mention a few things on the selection of pilots. So there's some project proponents that seem to think that the best is to have a lot of pilots and as diverse as possible. But the topic text, if you read it carefully, it says that you really need to justify the potential for synergies between the set of pilots that you have selected. The idea is really that you are able to convince the experts that will read your proposal that it makes sense for these people to collaborate, that they have something to learn from each other, that they will become more efficient by collaborating together. And sometimes it's as diverse and as many as possible the option, but sometimes it can be that you work with very similar communities in similar contexts. It's up to you. It depends what you want to do, but you have to critically reflect about that and be able to explain that in your proposal. For each of the pilots that you choose, you will need to demonstrate that you have the support of the necessary stakeholders. So very often this involves showing the support of the local or regional authorities that you need to implement the project, but it can be also that you also need to show the support of specific groups that you target or that you want to work with. So be also careful and explain how your pilot has gathered the necessary support. And you will also need to show that every one of your pilots is additional and complementary to what exists. So if you're working, for instance, in a city where you already have an energy information point that gives kind of general advice on energy communities, don't do the same again. I mean, you have to talk to them and see how could you develop a complementary service. Try to really not replicate what exists already in that context, but try to remain complementary. The same goes for national enabling frameworks. Many member states already have support structures, so you really need to make sure that your proposal includes actions that are complementary to those. Next slide. And if you have to keep one message from everything I'm going to be talking about today, is this one. Please build on what exists. So basically, when we started this topic in 2021, there were not a lot of guidance tools. There were not a lot of platforms. There was not a lot of material out there if you wanted to create an energy community that would basically take you through the process. So we have supported a lot of projects, not only us, but also national governments and regional governments. We've been really working on developing that kind of guidance. And today you have out there really a wealth of tools, of excellent tools that can really provide you a start, that can give you that can give you a guide, step-by-step guide to create an energy community. Don't do that again. So you have to reuse what exists. In some contexts, it may be necessary to translate some tools, maybe to adapt them, but really build on what already exists. That goes for tools and guidance, but it also works for platforms and networks. You are really encouraged to reuse what already exists and explain in your proposal how will you do that. And in case you do identify a gap and you do want to develop a specific tool or a specific guidance, then you have to be very careful and explain it very well in your proposal. Why is that necessary? Why is that complementary? And also explain how will you make sure that this is available to other people? How will that help others not have to go through the same steps that you will have to go through to create it? That's that. Please keep this in mind. Do not develop new tools if those already exist. Next slide. And in order to do that, basically, we expect you to do some research before the 19th of September. So, of course, many projects have the temptation to devote some months at the beginning of the project to look at the tools that exist, but we don't expect you to do that. We expect you to, at proposal stage, go through resources like, for instance, the toolbox that was created by the Energy Communities Repository that has already a wealth of tools. That's not the only platform that exists. There's other platforms. If you Google it, basically collecting energy community resources, go through them, see what's there and see what would be necessary for you. at proposal stage as much as possible. Next slide. And here you have basically just a number of the projects that we have supported. As many of them have tools that have been developed. Many of them have approaches that you can learn from. Many of them have kind of do's and don'ts. So go through them and see what can you learn from those. Next slide. And now let's move on to impacts. So impacts. This is a section that has a higher weight in the scoring system. So please pay attention to this section and don't do it quickly. The key here is credibility. So you need to report impacts that are linked to the project action. We see many times projects that report, for instance, on energy efficiency or on energy savings, and they don't have any action related to kind of renovation or energy efficiency. So please make sure that whatever you report as impact can be traced back to your action. And the key is credibility. So we are not scoring higher proposals that will have higher impacts, but looking really at how credible it is and also how difficult is it to create an energy community or to achieve a specific impact in a specific context. So they are really, experts look at them in relative terms, so really try to remain realistic. And in order to do that, you will also have to show in your proposals what is your baseline and also explain quite clearly what are the assumptions that allow you to reach the impacts that you report on. You will have to quantify two types of impacts, the topic-specific impacts, I'll talk about them just now, and the life set common indicators, and you will have to quantify those impacts both within the project time frame and also 5 years after the project ends. Next slide. So these are the topic-specific impacts. You will not have to quantify all of them, only the ones that are relevant for the type of project that you are implementing, that you're planning to implement. They are quite clear. So energy community project supported, energy communities created, the number of operational support services for communities, the number of citizens that are taking part in those communities, the number of actors you've trained and which type of actors you're training, and also how many local and regional authorities are committed to replicate. Depending on your approach, you may want to add some impact. So if, for instance, if your project really focuses on energy poor households or on women, or you may want to also add some other impacts of your projects to make sure that experts understand the full reach of what you want to achieve. And then on replication, I will also want to mention that very often a very common mistake that we saw in this topic is that replication is just a deliverable, a replication plan in the last 3 months of the project. Please don't do that. The idea is really that we cannot have a live project in every European municipality, unfortunately. So the idea is really that projects take on board the need for replication of whatever they're doing in their entourage or in their region or in their country. And so please devote some time and some resources within the project to achieve this replication and to think about what would someone else need to replicate my action, and how can I support that in the best way possible. And that has to be reflected in the proposal. Please do not only include a replication plan deliverable, please outline your approach to replication there. Next slide. And these are, you saw it already in the ENERPOV presentation. These are the life set common indicators. Here, I guess that one key word that you need to understand is triggered. So we want you to quantify the energy savings, the energy generation, the investments triggered. And that means basically that by the end of the project, the investment decision has to be taken, which means that, for instance, we don't expect you to have built a district heating network, a community district heating network by the end of the project. That would be very ambitious for the typical timelines that we have, but we would like you to at least have managed to reach the investment decision by the end of the project, and then you can claim the impacts related to that investment. Next slide. Next slide. And then here, just like a wrap up, you have enough time. Please work on your proposal, make it as context specific as possible. The budget, as I said, is 7 million euro. The topic text indicates 1.75 million as an indicative budget per project, but it's really an indication. It really depends on what you want to do. So you can have a very high score and be funded even if you propose a smaller project or if your budget is slightly higher. So you have quite a bit of flexibility. Take it just as an indication. And if you need to know more or less when will your project start in order to basically understand the complementarities with other services, etc., basically you will submit the proposal in autumn 24, but the action should start around autumn 25. Maybe some projects will start already that summer, a little bit earlier, but you have 1 year for the evaluation of proposals and also for the grant agreement preparation. So just bear that in mind when you think about your timing. And here you have a QR code. Read the topic text carefully and good luck. Next slide, please. Just here, I think I have, next slide, please. Just a quick reminder, there will be some frequently asked questions published. The frequently asked questions in the Funding and Tenders portal appear at the bottom of the topic text. They are updated regularly. So before you submit your proposal, and regularly if you are writing one proposal, check there and read them because they may give you interesting insights. If you have questions that are not covered by the published frequently asked questions, here is the email that you can send your questions to, and we will answer to you, and we will also publish the answer so that everybody is aware of those. Next slide. And if you are working on a proposal, you are also encouraged to contact your national contact point that can help you with your application. And with that, yeah, I wish you good luck, and we are happy to take some questions if we have time.
Can you hear me? Okay, fine, sorry. So thank you very much, Talia. Of course, we will have a frequently asked questions published for all the topics of this call. So as mentioned before, all questions can only be put through Slido. We know that we are running a bit late now, but we have the privilege to be the last session of this info day. So we can allow ourselves for a few more minutes, and so we can take a few questions. If you haven't managed to put your question, you can still do this now, but maybe there won't be really much time to reply. But otherwise, you can always send your questions to CINEA Life Clean Energy Transition Functional Mailbox, which you can find on the CINEA website. And you are also invited for any questions you have. Remember, we have a network of national contact points, and we have the list on our website as well. And you are invited to also contact them for any questions you might have in relation to the preparation of your proposal. So we then would like to go through the questions. The first one, the one that has been most voted, I think is for Elena. So Elena, I think you are still with us. So if you could reply to this question, will the Social Climate Fund be managed centrally in Brussels or in the different member states?
Not sure I understand what we mean about centrally managed. Perhaps it's the question is about the type of management as we define it, direct management and share management, more the side of the cohesion policy. So the Social Climate Fund it's actually very similar to direct management, for instance, under the recovery facility. So in that respect, if you want, we can say centrally managed by the Commission in close cooperation with the member states. As I said, to access the fund, the member states have to submit an already final plan by June 2025 to the Commission that will address it, that will assess it, and based on a positive assessment, the fund can be operational from 2026. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you very much. Then a question for Talia on the energy communities topic. If public authorities need to be part of the consortium.
It's not a requirement. You have to show that they support your action. The best way, of course, the strongest way probably is to have them as part of the consortium. But if not, you can also obtain letters of support. Ideally, you don't write a letter of support that is identical for all the people that will give you support for your proposal. But ideally, you also have a letter of support in which the local authority or the regional authority kind of defines what's their interest and what's their commitment towards the project, so as tailored as possible.
Thanks, Talia. Another question for the energy communities topic. If there is a minimum or an adequate number of inhabitants for the municipalities where energy communities are created, and they make a reference to the Repower EU indication of 10,000. And then if a regional authority can lead the project, the consortium. Thanks.
Okay, so can a regional authority lead the project or the consortium? Of course, it can. So that's yes. And then regarding the minimum or adequate number of inhabitants, it's very flexible. We've had successful projects in like gathering inhabitants of very small municipalities or villages in very rural context. And we've had also successful projects in big cities, and there's really no threshold regarding the size of the municipality.
Thank you. And then a question for energy poverty topic. In relation to the scope 3 of the topic, so related to the national energy poverty observatories, should they be public body or can be managed by private entities or foundation? Nina, please.
Thank you. Very, very good question. We have not been prescriptive about this in the topic text. What we would say is that they have to obviously represent all the relevant stakeholders to address the issue and have certain legitimacy to do so. But it could indeed be either public or private or foundations, as you mentioned. I think here we will also do a frequently asked question to clarify this point in the coming weeks.
Yes, thanks. And another question for you, Nina. If equipment or small works like windows replacement and so on for renovation are eligible costs to include in the proposal?
Thank you. So the short answer is no, equipment costs are not eligible under this sub-program. So the LifeSet program doesn't finance the technologies themselves, but the process and the setup of the services and the activities that will then trigger the energy efficiency and renewable energy investments. I would say in particular cases, some very limited low-cost devices may be considered eligible for funding if it's really justified in the proposal that it's indispensable for the specific action. I think this is very unlikely given the different subscopes of the topic this year. However, bigger costs that's mentioned, for instance, replacement of windows would not be eligible under this topic.
And the following question related to the ENERCOM topic would have a very similar reply to the one that Nina had for the energy poverty one. Talia, do you want to add anything compared to what Nina said?
No, it's the same. I mean, in most cases, we basically, the LIFE program focuses on supporting brains, not bricks, which means that we really support all the kind of preparatory actions, all the staff costs, etc., but we don't fund the infrastructure costs.
Thank you. And then for energy poverty, the second sub-scope on policy support on ED implementation, should this be at the national or can they be also at the regional, for example, level?
Well, the focus of the action should be mainly on the national level. We are talking about the EED implementation, so mainly national legislation. However, of course, this depends a little bit on the country that we're looking at. So some limited analysis and support at regional level may be considered justified in clearly specified cases in a larger country, for instance. But it would be really up to the proposers and the proposal to explain this and explain why this would need to be addressed at a subnational level.
And still for you, Nina, software development is eligible under NRPOV?
It depends. I think here we would need to have a little bit more detail on what is meant by software development. As I mentioned, IT development costs, IT tools, applications, platforms. These are the types of costs and activities that we are not really looking for in this topic. So so this would need to be very clearly justified in the proposal why this is needed, and indeed the software development for such an application, for instance, would also need to be well justified and limited. But I think here as well we can also develop a frequently asked question in the coming weeks.
I think, thanks, Nina. I think Elena wanted to complement on the previous question related to the ED, right, Elena?
No, it was more, if I may follow up on the Social Gamma Fund, just not to create any confusion. Even if it works, as I said, similarly to a recovery plan, so with milestones and targets. And also there is this dialogue between the member state and the Commission. The local aspects can be certainly taken into account. And so I just wanted to clarify that and it's not only the national level that can be involved and can benefit from that. And this is clearly also explained in the regulation. So it's not only the national level in the management and implementation of the fund that will be involved.
Thank you very much, Elena. So it's really time now to almost conclude. But before doing that, I really would like to you to, if you are still on Slido, hopefully you will see there is a poll, a survey that we really would like you to complete, if possible, to indicate your answer to this satisfaction survey, if possible, now before the session is closed. I think we can go on while you are doing that. Hopefully, a number of you will still do it. Please, we need this feedback from you. Then just to recall that this recording, the recording of this session will be made available, as well as all the PowerPoint presentations. So it's you will have the possibility to, if you miss something, or if any other person would like to see the recording, is available. And then, of course, we look forward to receiving very interesting, hopefully innovative, bringing in also new ideas, proposal. And we really wish you a successful preparation of your application. And would like to thank all the speakers of today's session. I think we went long because there were many interesting things to share with you. So hopefully it was also interesting to you. And we wish you a nice afternoon and good, nice weekend to all. Bye.